Welcome to Philosophizant, the show where we discuss the philosophy of philosophers and the philosophy of doers. We dive deep into traditional philosophy, political theory, and history, and also explore what personal philosophies motivate the most creative, innovative, and driven people of today's world. You can decide, is this a show about philosophy, or is it not? Today on the show, we have a very special guest, Derek Mobley, who is running for Guilford County Commissioner. He plans on strengthening programs designed to prevent youth from acquiring criminal records through placing them in constructive internship programs, attracting investment by building an esports stadium, and improving the county's use of technology. Mobley has a background as a corporate economist and holds degrees in history and economics from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and an MBA from University of North Carolina, Greensboro. Disclaimer: since recording this, I decided to begin working for Derek Mobley's campaign as a volunteer. Part of the reason I decided to do this interview was in order to determine if Derek Mobley's political ideas aligned enough with my own in order to be comfortable working for his campaign. We do not agree on everything, but because of Derek Mobley's dedication to using innovation for good, helping youth at high risk of acquiring criminal records, and using investment to increase opportunities, I decided that I indeed want to work for him and give him my full endorsement. So Derek, my first question for you is, what made you want to begin this endeavor of running for office? Is this a dream you have always had, or is it something you decided to take up recently?
Sure. Well, first off, thanks for having me. I think the first time I thought about getting into politics, I can really take it back to fourth grade, is we had this sort of group activity where we had to write a letter to the principal, talking about things that we liked about her, and we had to do it as a group. And the group that I was in, you think about when you're trying to work in groups, everybody has different ideas. And sort of my idea with the group was, okay, let's talk about what our main idea is individually and figure out how do we package that in, to this letter that we send to the principal. And, we did that. And so when we finally got to present it, our group had the longest, nicely structured letter, and it was the one that kind of won, and they sent it on to the principal. And that was really the first time where I realized, I'm like, oh, I have a knack for kind of bringing people together, and it wasn't just my idea, right? It's like sort of my idea was let's bring our ideas together and create something better. And that was when I first got kind of that instinct of this is something I really like to do. And so, to my mind, that's what politics should be. And so just I've kind of been on that journey, I think, for my entire life, at some point having that type of activity. So.
Okay. But you're not like Bill or Hillary Clinton, who are like dead set on becoming president since like age of 5.
No,
were you?
Yeah.
Okay. And tell me, what made you decide to study economics? Because it sounds like you discovered your people skills in elementary school, but economics also requires a lot of statistical and sort of more mathematical knowledge.
Right. So I started basically as a history major at Chapel Hill.
Okay.
I've always been a history enthusiast, and I took some of the AP courses, and I realized, I could kind of get in and out of college in 2.5, years if I wanted to. And I said, well, I don't really want to do that. Number one, I want the full college experience. And number two, what you can get with a history degree can be constricting. You can be a teacher, you can go into law, but it's a little bit more confining. So I said, what can I do that's kind of practical? And that's how I kind of fell into economics initially.
All right.
And so it really took me about 2 years of economics classes before I realized that I really enjoyed it, kind of analyzing decisions and allocating resources efficiently. So it was kind of, I grew into it, and it wasn't by intention. So.
Wow. That's really good. I took macroeconomics and microeconomics, and I really enjoyed those 2 classes. But when I took microeconomic theory, now that's where it got a little difficult for me.
Sometimes it's a weed out class. That's when do you want to do this as a profession or not?
Oh yeah, I got an A in the class, but I probably don't remember much.
Right.
All right. So now history and economics, in terms of like social studies, those are seen as kind of diametrically opposed disciplines in a way, whereas history is much more, not necessarily subjective, but it's much more about analyzing, rather than using data to analyze. Historians can choose to look at a specific speech. They can be subjective in choosing what to look at.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with economics, you don't have that liberty. You can't pick and choose your data points. Because with history, you can't study everything that happens, right? Every historian has the job of being a selector of what's important and choosing to highlight what's important. Whereas with economics, the way of thinking is different. You're analyzing large sets of data, and you have to firmly prove with mathematics that there's a causation or a correlation. You can't, you don't have the liberty of looking at things from the larger scope that history chooses. Would you say that's right? So how do the two disciplines go together?
Well, that's an interesting perspective. I can see where you're coming from, but because economics kind of, and I think sort of grew out of history, because you think kind of people think of the foundational economic text as The Wealth of Nations, which is written by Adam Smith. And that one it's kind of a historical exposition of why he thinks certain nations are wealthy and some of them aren't. So I think, economics kind of started out as history, and it became more mathematical over time. So there's a guy named Alfred Marshall in the late 1800s who really propagated that kind of mathematical, analytical version of economics, and Paul Samuelson, who's another kind of famous mathematizer of economics. So definitely mainstream economics has become much more mathematical, kind of like you say.
Especially microeconomics, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, and I remember reading about this in my microeconomic theory class, and I learned that a lot of the original mathematical economists started to move in that direction because of a disillusion with the historical approach, particularly the Marxist historical
that's what I was
historical materialist approach, right?
Yeah.
Right. So studying, I'm just curious, maybe I didn't phrase this well at first, but studying both disciplines, is there ever a time where you feel that the knowledge you gain from one is irreconcilable with the other, or are both sort of reconcilable and adding to your understanding? Or are they just, is that not a valid question because you're just studying two different things altogether?
No, I mean, I think they relate very closely, I would say. And there's definitely a lot of, maybe cross-pollination is the right word. And so, I would say I don't ever feel like they're irreconcilable. I think, the problem with economics, in my opinion, sometimes is it's too narrow.
Yeah.
And it gets it to where you can't answer significant questions. Like people say that about micro, it's become increasingly obsessed with very small problems, whereas history kind of has the opposite problem where people are trying to craft grand historical narratives.
Oh, I see. And
sometimes, that an economist is like, what am I supposed to do with this? What are your assumptions? What are your postulates? How do I work this out as a theory? So, I definitely think there are problems on each side, but there are lots of places where I feel like they mesh and one can inform the other personally.
And now recently I've been reading, a lot of thinkers such as Robert Reich, who is, an economist by profession.
Theory or? No,
Robert Reich is the UC Berkeley public policy.
Okay.
I'm not sure which institute specifically on UC Berkeley, but he studies public policy at, UC Berkeley, and he does research, but his books they read very historical. He describes the large scale social transformations that affect the economy and the feedback loop between politics, economics, and society. So, and he's on the left, but there are also thinkers on the right, such as Thomas Sowell, who do sort of similar things. So, it's good that you were able to find a way to synthesize the two branches of knowledge. I think that synthesizing different perspectives is always a better way to understand things. I want to ask next about your work experience. So right now you're a data manager at Volvo. Did that continue to, and you also worked at BB&T. So did those experiences shape your views in any way, or was it, or inspire you to, or raise an awareness about certain issues by working in those industries?
Yeah, I would think a little bit. First off, it's kind of,
I mean, you seem to be very innovation focused.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Going from first, the university world to the working world is very different, because you see what kind of skill, like the university there's always this, I think, tension between, is the university supposed to just prepare you to be, like a critical thinking human being, or is it supposed to prepare you to do a job? So when I got to BB&T, I realized they really needed me to do a few skills, some of which I had learned a little bit about, in school, but a lot of the stuff that I used in school, of course, never really came into play at BB&T. So I kind of experienced that first of all so depending on what you think the university is for, you could probably have different opinions about education. Also, with BB&T, it's kind of funny. I don't know how much you know about them, but one of their former CEOs, John Allison, was a big proponent of Ayn Rand, who is an objectivist philosopher.
Yes, I've read Ayn Rand.
So that was kind of my first, I decided if I was going to work for the company, that was a big part of the culture. I was going to spend a little bit more time learning about objectivism and their culture. So, that was a big, experience for me because, Ayn Rand was kind of, I feel like, persona non grata from my previous, intellectual background. So that's kind of with BB&T. With Volvo, it's been much more practical, where we work with transportation, driving the economy. I solve very day to day, I feel like, more concrete problems.
I started reading Atlas. I can see why BB&T would be an Ayn Rand company. I started reading Atlas Shrugged. And then it turned me off. So I have to say I stopped reading, and I regret that because now I have the conviction that when you start a book, you should, especially if you get like halfway, then you should finish it to do justice to the author. But anyway, at that time I didn't like the book, and then I told my friend, a friend I have at Chapel Hill, his name's John Bovio. He's a very entrepreneurial soul. He's starting his own business, about Ayn Rand. And then he became a big proponent of Ayn Rand and started telling me how good Ayn Rand was again. So I'm just going to explain to the audience what Ayn Rand believes. So Ayn Rand takes her ideology originally from Nietzsche's egoism, the idea that there's two types of moralities: the slave morality of being caring, compassionate, and humble towards others, and then the master morality, which argues that some people are born as kings, or born with the natural, almost predatory instinct to gain and to be ambitious and to disregard what others say. And so Ayn Rand took Nietzsche's philosophy and placed it in economic terms. And so she used that, as well as her own experience growing up in Soviet Russia, her own observations, in order to attack previous philosophers for their sense of duty. She was a conservative, but she really didn't like Christianity, because Christianity has an ethics of duty. And so her ideology is that we should pursue self-interest. And in a society where we're allowed to pursue self-interest and not be obligated towards others, the only society where that's possible is capitalism, and very laissez-faire capitalism. I don't know if she was one of the "we don't need roads" type of people.
Or she would say, we don't need the government to build roads, is what she would say.
But from reading Atlas Shrugged, she really has a disdain for the type of intellectual who supports social justice, and a disdain for any idea of the common good. But it is a very interesting book. I have to say, it did make me think. So is there anything in that or any other part of her philosophy that I left out that you might agree with?
Well, I mean, I will say I was able to power through Atlas Shrugged. I wasn't able to do The Fountainhead because it's basically the same story, in my opinion, over. I got about halfway through it and I had to stop. But, I think, I am a proponent, of capitalism, and there's a lot of different names we could throw out where, I think Ayn Rand's a very provocative thinker. But you have a couple other folks like Joseph Schumpeter and Friedrich Hayek, who I think put an idea similar to hers out, but do it in a better way. Like Joseph Schumpeter, creative destruction is the term that he coined
I've heard of that.
The capitalist process. It also kind of opened me to...
what exactly is creative destruction? Is it like... the idea that some businesses that are bad businesses fail and new businesses spring up. Is that what it's referring to?
That's sort of the idea.
Okay.
Is, I mean, the famous quote from his book, I'd probably paraphrase it, but he's like, the true story of capitalism isn't how it makes things more efficient, but it's how it breaks down different social structures. And that's what his book, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, is about. He kind of takes the opposite view, whereas we talk about Alfred Marshall, who likes perfect competition and, you talk about fine-tuning the economy through taxes. Joseph Schumpeter is basically like, hey, a monopoly is your statement that you've done a good job. You've created a product that's so superior that people can't compete with you. So
like Amazon.
Exactly. Amazon, like the startup folks are much more a fan, I would say, of Schumpeter than they are of someone like Alfred Marshall.
We're back on Philosophism, and I want to ask less on the philosophical side of how did the working at, was it BB&T? Mm-hmm. Change your views, and more on the practical economic side. Did working this job change? I know a big part of your platform is bringing jobs and investment to Greensboro. So did working this job change your views on what's needed to bring jobs and investment and prosperity?
Yeah, I think it did.
Or inform, not change necessarily, but inform your views.
Yeah, I think it definitely informed it because, when you work in banking, I'll say you get to see almost every industry because pretty much every industry relies on banking for some form of finance. And, with banks, they're almost like churches in a way. It sounds like sacrilegious, but it's one of the things I tell people is, if you look at banks, they have these big fancy buildings, right? And all of it is about giving people confidence. And so bankers are actually really powerful. So, because you look at the balance sheets of the companies and you basically decide if that company gets financing to expand or not.
Okay.
And you're using the deposits from the public essentially to do that. So yeah, I'd say the years in banking, helped me see, what do the banks look for?
I'm curious personally, is there a difference between when banks look at a local business versus a large business with how they decide how to give loans, and what is the implication for that for local economic growth?
I mean, yeah, I would say that it takes place at different levels of the organizations. Somebody at a branch can give a loan to a small business, whereas if you want to give a big loan to a large company, that's a big decision that takes place, by committee. And I think it's important. One of the things for our region in Guilford County, where I think we've suffered, is we don't have a major bank really in the Triad area or in Guilford County.
Not one based.
I see. We did have BB&T, which was based in Winston-Salem, Forsyth. They've moved to Charlotte. Several large banking institutions have moved to Charlotte, and I think that's really helped them with growth because you can just, if you want to finance the Panthers Stadium, right, the fact that you have several major banks there makes that a reality, whereas here it's just a little bit tougher. So.
Okay. I'm curious though, in your opinion, I've read something about how local businesses keep more money in the community because instead of giving out profits to shareholders, and profits to owners, it goes directly back into the community and is spent there. Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that or qualify that or disagree?
I guess I'd say I would qualify it. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely true, that smaller businesses do tend to keep a larger proportion of their money in the community. Yeah. But this is funny. I know we're kind of switching, but it also kind of harkens back to the discussion with Schumpeter is, larger businesses are able to operate at a much larger scale. So it may be, they're keeping 10% of their money in the community versus a small business which keeps 80%. But if that company is 50 times the size of the small business because of how efficiently it operates, overall,
there's economy of scale.
Yeah, people can be better off. So that's where you have to qualify it, I think, and balance it out.
Right.
Ideally, you would want a very large company headquartered in your region.
Okay. I think there might also be a case about loyalty. Maybe a small business might be less likely to outsource, but that's more of a conversation for another day.
Right.
Yeah. Now, since we're talking about business, I want to ask about some of your economic policies specifically. So here on your list of goals, one of the goals is a business advisory commission to provide feedback on business implications of new and existing taxes, a digital strategy commission in order to create and monitor a 5-year plan for digital infrastructure. Maybe you don't want to call it a 5-year plan. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a history nerd.
I know. It takes you back to communism.
Yeah. And a retirement commission to ensure that Greensboro is safe and livable. Let's start with the business advisory commission. How would how do you envision this functioning, and why do we need this?
So, I mean, the way a lot of advisory commissions function, so zoning is an example. Like a lot of governments have to have a zoning commission to make, and they basically help inform how you make changes in the use of land. So the principle is really similar, because right now, we don't really have that in our county. And so whenever you want to make changes with property taxes or fees or anything like that, what normally happens is the city, or in this case, the county staff would make a recommendation about, for the budget, we need to raise property taxes or whatnot. And then the county commissioners, would maybe take feedback from the public and do it yes or no. So the problem with that, I feel like, is, the county staff has their own agenda whenever they propose the increase. And the counselor or the
explain the agenda. Is in like a perverse incentive or something?
It can be. I'm not going to say that they're automatically perverse, but more revenue for them helps them grow their department. So they kind of have an interest in expanding the tax base, through raising tax rates or having more ordinances, so they need more people to enforce them. So that's kind of the incentive of a bureaucracy. And you can get input from the public, right? And if they do something that's really egregious, you might have angry people show up and, cause the county commissioners to change their mind. But, to me, I think it would be better if you kind of had this advisory body in the middle where we say, hey, this is what we're going to do. And you have these, folks with business experience who have been appointed by the commissioners who can kind of look at it and give their assessment. And ultimately, it's still up to the commissioners. They could still vote to raise the taxes, even if the advisory body said that's not a good idea. But they at least, a lot of times the staff is going to tell them that it's a good idea.
What would be a potential benefit or a potential con of raising or lowering taxes?
So, it's one of those, it depends on where you are. I don't know if you know the Laffer curve, sometimes.
I've heard of that.
If
could you explain that for the audience?
Yeah. So the Laffer curve is kind of the idea where, as tax rates go up, people's incentive to work goes down, so it can be counterproductive. You can raise taxes and that can cause the economy to contract, and then you'll actually get less tax revenue. Whereas, maybe if you lowered it a little bit and people worked more and the economy expanded more, you would get more revenue.
Right.
So it's a little bit controversial.
And invest as well, not just work.
Yeah, and invest more. Yeah. So it was very popular in the 80s. How, applicable it is when is always debatable. I was trying to think back. I guess the question was, that would be the example where, if we really feel like, hey, this increase in property taxes is not really necessary and it'll be counterproductive, maybe the business community would be the first people to see that. Whereas where it can be good, which is something we may face, I'll say in Guilford County, is, like for me, public education is very important. The county is a big financer of public schools. And if you feel like the schools have been underfunded, if you increase the tax rate and you get more revenue and that leads to better schools, which leads to better talent, which leads to business growth, that's where you can make that argument. So.
And now let's move on to your digital strategy commission. I think that's something, I don't think many local governments would in North Carolina have a digital strategy commission.
Right.
So what is that about?
So, I mean, this is something we see a lot in especially bigger companies, the digital transformation, trying to move away. You would be surprised in local government how much is still done, paperwork wise, how many systems have been around since the 80s, computers that are
still bought out by the paper printing companies.
Yeah, people that are still using Windows XP or something like that. We actually had recently in Guilford County, there was a hack of the supplier of their phone system, and people couldn't call, like the Register of Deeds office. So this would basically be saying like, hey, we need a commission that says, what does Guilford County government look like with 21st century digital infrastructure?
I'm curious, do you envision blockchain technology being utilized in local, if you know what that is?
I do know what blockchain is.
Yes.
I would say not in the immediate future.
Okay.
I have my own opinions on, blockchain is very popular, and I see where it can be useful in certain areas, but I think it's a little bit.
I mean, from what I understand, all the major banking companies are moving towards developing blockchain technology. Bank of America. Does BB&T have any blockchain initiatives?
I'm sure they do. Yeah. Everybody, like I said, it's the hot topic right now.
Right.
So everybody wants to say that they're doing something with blockchain, but again, for me, it's been around for 12 years, and I've yet to really see,
I understand.
What is it for? Maybe we'll figure it out.
It's for providing transparency, because you don't have to store information on a centralized server anymore. So the idea is for government, and I did some research on this a while back, is that you could have blockchain systems that would be available to residents in order to keep the government accountable, and there's no way that corrupt officials could doctor the data in that sense. Unless, of course, you enter in doctored data in the first place, then it's not perfect. But I believe
it does have potential. It's just, we'll see. That would be more of, 10, 15 years, I feel like.
And the retirement commission. I'm curious about this one, because I was having a debate with my friend who's a total free market Ayn Rand libertarian the other day. And she texted me, Roman, I just realized 15% of my paycheck gets taken away for Medicare and Social Security by the government. Those bastards. So, I've been thinking about the role of the federal government in retirement with providing those services, but I haven't ever thought about the role of local governments. Can you expand on that?
Sure. So, one of the things about America as a whole, Guilford County as well, we're going to go through a period for the next 20 years or so, at least, where a larger segment of the population is going to be older.
Right.
And the thing about, they may have mobility issues, they're going to be in declining health.
Social Security is running out of money, isn't it?
Well,
I understand.
It could, yeah. That's a little bit, the county doesn't have a lot of control over that, but that would be an issue if something were to happen with Social Security that could hurt the income of those retired, individuals. But kind of my thinking behind that is, we're going to have a larger, older population. The one good thing about those folks a lot of times is they generally have more money because they've saved it up. So if you have a larger retired population here, that is a good potential customer base. And, it may sound kind of silly, but a lot of the things that I feel like, the younger community is looking for kind of mirrors what, older people actually need. So, good broadband connectivity, because, we found out a lot of them don't want to go to retirement homes. If they can, they want to age in the house that they have.
Yeah,
for them to do that, they need high quality internet connections. They need good public transportation. They're not going to be flying all over the world anymore. So they want to have quality parks where they can go and spend time. So really, if you're, and that's what the AARP, which is the Association for basically retired people, they have a designation you can get called being a safe and livable community. So the idea behind that retirement commission is to say, hey, let's make sure that we have this.
Does this so that Guilford have?
No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
Currently not. Yeah. So it's a goal, right? Yeah.
So we're an unsafe and unlivable community. Is that what it means?
No, I don't know that the converse is true.
The converse. Okay. Interesting. My grandparents live abroad. My mother's family is from China, and so there in Asia, the idea is that it's like the family's responsibility to send money to take care of their parents. But of course, this causes a lot of social issues in a lot of East Asian countries because if you don't have family that's willing to take care of you, and there's no Social Security, you're going to be like trying to get a job at a very old age. And another problem is age discrimination in the workforce. A lot of retired people want to remain active and do like a part-time job at a coffee shop or something, or volunteer or something. But I don't know much about age discrimination. But have you looked into that issue at all? That's because I know like remaining active in retirement is also important for good health.
Right. I mean, I'll say a little bit, and I mean that is a real thing. Age discrimination in the workplace, or even and when we say age discrimination, it can be older versus younger.
It's much worse in Asia, but in the U.S. it also exists.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I want to take a pivot. Let's talk about the city budgeting and compensation. So here it says you plan to incorporate zero-based budgeting and benchmarking exercise in the budgeting process. This was a little bit surprising to me, considering you're running as a Democrat, because I thought of that as more of a conservative position. Because from what I understand, it's like taking account of like every expense, right? And I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but in business, zero-based budgeting is talking about like counting like how many sheets of paper you're using.
Well, what it really means is you're
okay.
Because
my business class was wrong.
No, I mean I can see where you're coming from. There's two kind of major approaches to budgeting. One is, hey, what did we spend last year? Inflation was 2%, so we'll just raise the budget by 2%. That's how a lot of budgets are done. That's lazy budgeting, essentially. Zero-based budgeting is when you say, okay, we allocated money for this. Did that make sense? What happened?
So more like looking at marginal return.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's why, I could see it being seen as conservative, but, the idea behind it is more efficiently allocating your money. So at the end of the day, you could end up with the same size budget or a bigger budget. You just might be spending it on different things. So you might say, hey, we funded this program and it didn't work. And then the lazy government approach is to say, okay, well, maybe they need 10% more money to make it work, right? Whereas zero-based budgeting is like, okay, we funded it and it didn't work, and that's because it doesn't make sense. So we're going to take this money and we're going to put it to a program that was very successful, right? And see if we can build on that.
So how would you know if, let's say, the problem? I'm curious about this. You don't have to have an answer because it's a complicated question. But say, for example, you funded this program and it doesn't work. How would you know exactly why it's not working and what needs to change? Because this might be an important program, say like a program, one of the programs you're proposing. If you're, would the zero-based budgeting have a way to determine the broken variable, or is that something for a different?
It would be a different thing. I mean, you would really have to, I think, try to talk to the people who are supposed to be served by the program, because usually, the person who's in charge, their answer will usually be that you didn't give me enough money, right? So you need to talk to I would say, whoever it's supposed to serve, and usually they'll tell you, well, hey, it didn't work because it didn't meet this need, or, they gave me this form and then I didn't know where to send it. It can be something that, that simple. So.
And, also under the budgeting and compensation, compensation goals, you write that we want to encourage special assignments and continuing education for city employees. I'm curious about that. Why do city employees need continuing education?
And I think, county employees.
County.
So that is,
you did write city here.
I
that
did
might
write
be a
city.
mistake.
Maybe that's because I hadn't updated it yet. But so, I mean, that's really about keeping people intellectually engaged. So you don't want, I think a lot of people's image sometime of a typical government worker is, hey, you give them this job, they do these 5 things for 20 years and then they retire, right? And I don't want that. I don't think they want that. So it's more about, how do we give someone a career path and keep them up to date on the newest developments? Because that goes back to the idea behind the Digital Strategy Commission is a lot of these systems are working the way that they worked 15 or 20 years ago because
Is that because of cultural preferences or because of like an official policy in place that it has to be run that way?
I think it's more of the culture because, one of the things if you're, from Asia, you're maybe familiar with Singapore, which is a very well run city / country. And, they're a bureaucracy just like, Guilford County or the city of Greensboro is a bureaucracy, but they just operate a lot better, so you can see it's possible. We don't have to become Singapore because they do some things that, might be questionable from our standpoint. But I mean, but they have different, some of their governmental, policies around their employees. Clearly makes them perform better. So.
Actually, there's some progressives who really admire the Singaporean healthcare system because the way they do it is that private companies are incentivized to innovate, and there's also public funding, and they do it somehow in a way where there's not perverse incentives. So you're not just giving companies money to the most established companies. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. And speaking of innovative policies, your campaign has quite a few. I know one of the things you're thinking about is giving Wet and Wild Water Park to expand and become more, as well as a water park, a traditional theme park as well. That's something really fascinating idea. Can you expand on how you want to do that?
Sure. So, it's actually something that was discussed maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Just making it a mixed use theme park. But I mean, it would, basically involve working with the company that owns them to say, hey, let's make this more than a water park, or, with a water park to scale it up. Cause, really the idea behind it, for me, I'm trying to compare our region to the Triangle and to Charlotte. And one of the things I feel like they have, is a little bit better entertainment. And that, factors into businesses and corporations staying here and moving here.
Okay.
And Emerald Point is a very successful water park as it is. It's like maybe one of the top 25 in the United States, but it's more like, how do we take that to the next level? How do we build on something that's working and use it to draw more
probably,
people?
It might be a little weird if you get into like a roller coaster seat and the seat is wet though, because then it's.
Well, I don't know if you've ever been to Dollywood.
Does the roller coaster like dry the?
No, because in Dollywood they have two separate theme parks. They have a water park and they have roller coasters and all that, and you can buy passes for both of them. So that's an interesting idea that somehow you could connect the two a little more. I was thinking of it maybe being just. Is
there okay? So you're not thinking about them being in the same location, because that's what I was curious about.
I mean, they would be close.
Because I've seen Wet and Wild. It doesn't seem like there's. The last time I went, I didn't notice any like spare space nearby.
Right. I think they're. They, as long as it's within like a 10-minute bus ride or something, it would be, I think, doable. So.
Well, right now, I mean, construction and gas is very expensive from what I understand. The price of wood has gone up. Not that theme parks are made of wood, but some buildings might be. I'm not sure about the cost of steel. But would now in particular be a good time to push forward this expansion?
I mean, today probably not.
No.
But I would say 2022, 2023. What we're experiencing right now, just in sort of in my economic opinion, you've just got the aftershock from the pandemic. Economic activity was really depressed. And we did a lot of stimulus, so it's bouncing back a lot faster than people had planned. So you're running into bottlenecks everywhere.
Okay.
But I would expect those to get sorted out. And once that's a 5-year process, right?
What do you mean by bottlenecks for the audience?
So it's a lot of
restricted supply chain.
Yeah, when you're doing industrial planning, you have to get all the raw components and everything and forecast your demand, and that so a lot of that takes months and months. So if your demand forecast is wrong, like if you say I thought I was going to need 100 of these, so I bought materials for 100 of these, and then you need 500 of these. Well, you can't just go back and order the raw material because it's gone. Usually someone else has already scooped it up. So you have to wait and you have to raise, your price. Well, you don't have to raise your price, but it's the economic thing to do
So I'm curious, is the idea of expanding the water park more to increase economy on the demand side by increasing consumption, getting more people to travel here, spend at local restaurants, or is it to attract other corporations to come in?
It's really both.
How would that attract other corporations to come in?
So it's usually sponsorships. And just, one of the things I found, from traveling around to different cities is, if you're traveling to visit a company, usually they like to take you out on an excursion, right? And so, the water park, right now, I don't know that it would be a corporate excursion, right? It's a good thing for families to do in the summer, but if it were a bigger operation, that might encourage a company to move here because they would say, hey, we bring you in and hey, we'll go to the water park or the theme park for a day and that'll be part of it. So it's just one of those amenities that I think, bigger companies look for.
Are you down to answer a bit of a trick question?
I can try.
Okay, I'm going to jump to environmental sustainability as well as helping Wet and Wild expand. You also want to get the task Water Resources with getting the Water Sense Award from the EPA. Mm-hmm. I can't help but notice a bit of a irony, irony between wanting to help Wet and Wild expand its business and also wanting to get this Water Sense Award. Of course, you're helping it expand in a way that doesn't use more water, but still.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. If you're going to do it, you would want to do it in a way that's hopefully more ecologically sustainable. So, and that would be, if you're making it mixed use, that doesn't necessarily use as much water as maybe expanding the theme park itself. But that would definitely be something to.
Is water scarcity a big problem in this region?
It's fortunately right now it's not. That's one of the things. I mean, in the 80s, maybe in the 90s, it was. But we have, I think it's called Randleman Lake, as well as Townsend, Brant, and Higgins and Jeanette. So we actually have a lot of water capacity in Guilford County.
Right.
So that's.
I remember there was a drought several years ago, and there was never another drought again that I can remember.
That was before that. Once that lake kind of out towards Asheboro.
So if water scarcity isn't a problem, why do we need to get the Water Sense Award from the EPA?
So it's one of those things. The Water Sense Award. It's part of about making sure you're using it efficiently, and it's also about the quality of your water. Because I don't know if you've seen, there's been some concerns with there's a contaminant called PFAS. I think that's how you pronounce it. That some people have thought is in our water or might be coming from the airport.
What is it?
It's called PFOS, something like that.
Huh.
And it's one of those things. It's just a good idea to make sure that you have, in my opinion, quality programs. So Durham, for example, Durham has that award and we do not. And so if you have companies, again, this goes back to, a lot of companies now are big into sustainability.
Right.
And so, if they're trying to make the decision, do I want to come to Durham? Do I want to come to Guilford County? Well, one of the things I can tell my employees is, hey, in Durham, they have this high quality water. They care about, using it sustainably. Guilford County doesn't have it.
Right? Have you ever, this is kind of out of the ballpark, but have you ever read about a sort of controlled wetland or a natural wetland in order to purify water? Because that's something that I read about when I was taking environmental science that really was interesting to me, using the power of nature which already exists to purify water in order for human services.
No, I hadn't heard about that. I mean, again, if it's scalable, or, I don't know that we, like wetlands are probably more out east. So, you'd have to look at that, like, what does it cost?
Well, wetland doesn't necessarily mean like the swamp or anything, like the creek or like the land between, or there's a bog in Piedmont Triad Environmental, and I really love that bog. It's because it's such a cool place. It's totally unique. All the trees are dead, but there's like grass growing. So I think it used to be a forest, then it got flooded, and now it's like a wet grassland. Very interesting. And we're getting a bit off topic though. So back to economic game changers. I think this is the one that probably all the listeners will be most curious about. Creating a new mixed use sports arena connected to downtown Greensboro, and then using that sports arena for esports. First of all, what gave you the idea of making esports a part of your campaign for county commissioner?
Well, I mean, it's one of those things that, Guilford County, they call it Tournament Town, first of all, because we do a lot of sporting events here already. And whenever that first happened, people kind of take it for granted now, but, there was a time when things like the ACC basketball tournament, they were new sports, and Guilford County helped build them and pave the way. And that's one of the reasons we've been successful, I think, in the past. So, the idea is, it's like, hey, can we continue to be, leaders in, kind of sports innovation? And kind of the frontier right now is esports. It's growing in popularity. You have global, potential audiences. When they have tournaments, the purses are bigger than some of the professional sporting tournaments. So to me, that's just an opportunity, is to say, hey, it's still kind of in its formative stages. So maybe we could take the lead in having, competitive esports tournaments here. And again, that can filter back into, the academically, if you have computer science type programs that are related to building better games. If you're kind of a gaming hub, and then you have gaming type programming, and themes behind it, that's kind of a next generation, economy that I could see us.
I always thought that video games were a bit of a waste of time because, my dad told me that if I played video games, it would rot my brain, but then I started playing The Witcher, and I have to say I was really impressed by the depth of the world and the story. But from what I understand, esports are more around like games like Fortnite or like Skyrim, which is more about like fast competitive play.
Yep,
right?
Usually, or Counter-Strike, or League of Legends, stuff. And I haven't played them as much lately, with family and kids and everything. But I was kind of a lifelong gamer. I've never been, I wouldn't say I was ever really addicted to it, but I habitually played them pretty often. And they can be, like I said, they can be addictive, which can be problematic. But, they can also teach you a lot of different skills. Like one of my favorite games was Civilization, which I wouldn't see coming to esports, but when you've managed an entire city, and they're pretty thorough.
There's YouTubers who make like videos about their Clash of Clan village, so I'm sure Civilization could have an audience. It probably wouldn't be like something you would go to see live, but
But there's a lot of skills that you can learn from gaming, I feel like.
So how does the esports industry operate now? Is it very centralized like you see with the traditional sports? Like there's the NBA, NFA. Gosh, I watch so little sports. I only watch martial arts that I'm not even sure if I'm getting the names right.
The NBA is a real one.
Yeah.
And the answer to that is, they're trying to adopt that model. But it's still new, and one of the things that's different is, like I said, with esports is they're global. So like League of Legends is, it's very popular, in like Asia and other countries. So it's still, people are still trying to figure out, I think, what it looks like. So.
Is that a good thing for esports though? Because one of the things I do know about internet gaming is that a lot of gamers make money from like independent streaming, and like instead of like belonging to like a formal organization, you can make a lot of good money for yourself just by like what's it called, live streaming. Is there do you have a preference to one or the other, and what would be the advantages and drawbacks versus the centralized versus the indie model? Because I think it's really interesting that esports is like competitive esports does have organizations, but it seems to be less centralized.
Right.
Or rather, the central organizations seem to have less of a monopoly.
Right.
On online gaming. So what is your take on that?
I think the good thing with, if you have something centralized, is you have like a league, so you can have, rules, and that it's kind of a different experience. From somebody streaming and kind of doing their own thing.
So is that like totally different things? Is that not a valid question that asked?
I think it's related. Because, you would still want to give people because I could see the tension could come into, somebody could join a league, and part of them joining a league could be them saying, hey, you can't do your streaming anymore because to compete in this, we're making money off of it and we want to make the money. And if you're just playing on your own and people are watching you and we're not getting that money, that could be it, so I could see that being a potential clash. And I'll say I don't have an answer to that if that were to happen.
Well, that happens quite a bit in traditional sports.
Right.
Also a lot of debate about college athletes, whether or not they should get paid. A lot of debate about whether, as a player on a team, do you have free speech while you're like playing? And of course, like Colin Kaepernick made headlines with his kneeling during the national anthem. And even though like football players get a lot of money, but compared to the injuries they sustain, the time they put in, and that compared to the amount that they make for the owners of the teams, there's still quite a bit of a discrepancy. Yeah. Now I want to ask about your the last one in economic game changers is expand University Square into a collaborative campus focused on cutting edge graduate research. So are you saying that it's not already a cutting edge research center?
It's a good attempt.
Yeah.
But, again, I'm looking at, if you look at Research Triangle Park in Raleigh, which has been a huge, economic driver for them, is, having that type of partnership between startup businesses and, the university. So, right now you do have a couple of graduate programs there where people are working together. But, the idea would be you need a lot more of that. It needs to be on a much bigger scale. To me, just in principle, that goes back to why I would like to run is, I feel like we have as a region been very modest with what we try to do. We're sort of, I don't know if conservative is the right word.
So does University Square refer to the UNCG, to be clear, or other universities?
It's UNCG and A&T. So they have a kind of a collaborative campus there on South Elm, but it's, it's like one or two buildings.
Well, UNCG does have an entrepreneurship center where they help students start their own businesses, and there's also various centers for connecting with startups, but I don't know if it's innovation and tech focused specifically.
And again, this is kind of painting with a broad brush, but it's like living here for 12 years. One of the things I've noticed, people will always tell you, hey, we do have this program that does this, right? But it's never.
No, not up to scale.
It's just not up to scale, right? And it's what we'll do a lot of times, again, is we'll have 15 programs that all do a very similar thing and are just, what you need, in my opinion, is just a few very effective programs instead of 15 programs trying to do their own thing with very small groups of people.
But is there a disadvantage to institutionalizing entrepreneurship education? Because from what I've read about entrepreneurship and from my experience interning for entrepreneurs, there's kind of a culture of resistance towards government-led initiatives in some cases. Maybe Greensboro is unique in that case because the Greensboro Chamber of Commerce does seem to be pretty popular. So how do you deal with that discrepancy versus on one hand you want to encourage entrepreneurship and innovation, but on the other hand you're doing this from the perspective of being a government a county commissioner, someone from the government.
Right. Well, I mean, I know we talked about Singapore earlier, but to me, that's kind of what I would look at is that, they have a lot of state-led innovation that's very successful, right? And so basically trying to model, I would say, that type of approach.
And now let's pivot to public safety. So I want to ask about your plan to expand the GDP Teen Employment Initiative into a full-fledged summer job program. And it says that this program, from what I understand, connects teens in areas with high crime rates with employment opportunities. This is really interesting. Can you give us some background on more on how this program started, how it functions, and whether it's been successful or not? Why does it need to expand?
So it's, from our perspective, it was a new idea from the Greensboro Chief of Police, which is basically to try to connect more teens with summer jobs, and especially to have the police department leading it, to have people, get a little bit more familiar with law enforcement, especially if they're teens in high crime rate areas, they might be more inclined to, be nervous about law enforcement. So it's a way to kind of make them more comfortable. So that's, this is kind of a bunch of different pieces coming together. So there was that initiative from the chief of police. Justin Outling, who's actually running for city council, has an idea that's very similar for the city, to do something like this. But I actually did a little research and, so I'll say Raleigh has something like this. Charlotte has something like this. And, so basically the initiative from the chief was just, hey, I think this is a good idea. Let's try to help these kids find jobs. And then you look at Charlotte and Raleigh, they actually have programs that are funded that do this systematically.
What sort of jobs? Pretty good.
So there's really, I guess there were three kinds that I saw. There's the, kind of with the police force. You could be an intern helping out the police course. You could help out the court system, or they could connect you with the city government or with private employers. So private employers can sign on and you basically, the idea was basically, I think 10 hours a week, for 3 months during the summer to, when they wouldn't be in school. So the idea is to start giving them that professional, experience. And, sort of my spin on it is, we could do this at the county level instead, because there is a county sort of body called the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council. sort of their job is to help, keep kids from getting into the criminal justice system. So we're more set up, I feel like, than the city to do this.
Yeah.
So, we could take the lead on that. And then, where it's coming from the chief of police is, I think, a good place to start is getting people who are in, zip codes where there's high crime rates, getting those kids jobs that are related to the court system or law enforcement so that they get a little bit more familiar with it, right? So they're not, the idea is it could be a deterrent. It's also giving them something to do, because ideally, because the other thing that I don't know if we touched on in here is we're having a shortage of first responders. So there's a shortage of police officers, firefighters, teachers. So if you're giving them exposure to that job in law enforcement, maybe they would want to go into law enforcement. And so then if you have people from high crime zip codes that are choosing to join law enforcement, you're increasing employment and you're, to me, I think those are a lot of things that can help drive the crime rate down.
Sounds really good. I've considered joining law enforcement as well, but I have to say I can foresee there being a lot of resistance to this program the way it's set up, because if you're a teen from a high crime area and then you're like joining law enforcement, well, there's already a lot of mistrust in those communities, and this is a national issue, not just in Guilford, but Guilford, but in the whole nation. So would your friends call you a snitch? Like, how would you like phrase this program in a way where it doesn't seem like if people view it as like cops versus the people, how that's going to take a lot of work to change. How would you begin to change that?
I mean, I'll say the program is the way to begin to change that, in my opinion, is to say, start fairly early, not when people are in their late 20s or 30s and have kind of already formulated their opinions, is to say, hey, you're a teenager in the summer. It would be nice for you to have a job. So why don't you have a job? And if you're putting them in contact with the police, then, hopefully they're getting that experience from a different side.
So
right?
This is the change from this program meant to be a one-way change or a two-way change? Is it meant to change the communities, to increase trust in the communities, but also it's meant to do that? But do you also foresee this changing the culture of the police department itself, as to how those police might interact?
I can see it being a two-way change. Yeah. They have community policing, with the idea where the policemen should be familiar with the community that they're in, and that's a way to do that. Because historically, I think it's been a little bit different, or at least, I would say way back when we probably had community policing, and then more the idea was the police officer should be impartial. So you can just bring someone from outside and they can come in and kind of have a clear, not taking sides and dispense justice that way. And the problem with that, as you alluded to, is it's hard to trust that person because they come in from the outside and they don't know all the particulars that are going on in that community. Right. So we're sort of trying to pivot, I think, back towards the community model. And this is kind of a way to help do that, I think.
Excellent. And you also mentioned that you want to implement family support in order to increase gender diversity in public safety. So is that with police specifically, or firefighters?
I'd say both specifically, because we know, not being stereotypical, but teachers a lot of times predominantly, female, police officers predominantly, men, firefighters predominantly men. So, I think, having an increase in gender diversity would be good, especially for the police department, just because, if you look at the studies do show, female officers tend to be, associated with less, complaints, less violence. And so, it's just, I think there would be a lot of positives to making women more comfortable with being in the police force.
I totally agree with that. Yeah. Sounds like a very, both good for the opportunity for the individuals and good for the community. Now, this last question isn't necessarily a question about one specific policy, but I can't help but notice that a lot of the initiatives that you're proposing, they might increase the cost of money, the amount of money needed to be spent. For example, competitive city compensation, encourage special assignments in education, creating the new advisory commissions, and your sustainability goals. for example, using solar powers at city facilities, and of course investing in the mixed-use sports arena. How do you plan to fund all this if you were elected? Would there have to be a tax increase, or would you do like a public-private partnership with certain businesses to do this? How would that work? And if there does need to be a tax increase, how would you know that wouldn't negatively affect the community?
So, I mean, you don't know at the end of the day. I would say I would strongly suspect that it wouldn't negatively affect the community. And
it would or wouldn't?
It would not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, yeah, obviously I wouldn't propose it if I...
The county commissioner comes out.
Yeah. I'm going to damage the community. Yeah, I mean, and it would be all that, especially for stadiums, public-private partnerships are usually a good idea. One of the things I'll say, is one of the primary ways that we're funded with the county is through property taxes, and that has to do with the value of the real estate. And when you revalue the property and the property value goes up, you can get more revenue from that without increasing the tax rate. So, ideally, if what you're doing is improving the quality of life in your community, the rise in the tax base can offset, the need to increase the tax rate. So if there's more development coming in here, if you have people, you're building the stadium and there are more companies that come here because of that grows your tax base and you can have more revenue without having to raise the tax rates.
Okay.
So, and then there's also, we talked about zero-based budgeting before. So the first thing I want to do, is you can go in and look, what are we doing today that's maybe not working as well? And can we shift some of those funds around to these other projects that might perform better, right?
Yeah.
So that's, that's a classic political answer, is to say, I don't know at the end, is the answer going to be we need to raise the property tax by 1 or 5 cents? I would hope that it's not, because I am an economist by nature. So I would love to be able to say, hey, I can go in there and do all this and lower property taxes, right? But, the fact is there's so many variables you're not going to know until the end. But, I can say I would not vote to do it unless I thought, that the long-term impact was going to be that there's going to be more development and higher income so that people would be better off. So.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions I have. Lastly, I want to ask about your experience. This has nothing to do with policy, of being the Aikido, is it pronounced Aikido? Aikido president of the Aikido club at UNC Chapel Hill. That's just, so I watch a lot of YouTube about martial arts. I haven't heard great things about Aikido, because I've heard that Aikido's philosophy is defend yourself without hurting your opponent, which can be very hard. Is that accurate?
I would not say that's accurate.
No. Okay. Yeah. So what is Aikido? How does it differ from other grappling arts like jiu-jitsu, judo?
I mean, I would say it's defend yourself.
First of all, where's it from?
So it's from Japan.
Okay.
There was a guy, however you say his name, like Mori Yushiba was kind of the inventor of Aikido. And the style that I practice, called Tamiki style Aikido, is actually, it's like a judo hybrid.
All right.
It's like teaching Aikido using judo methods. And it's more like giving yourself the option of hurting your opponent. That's the thing. And because a lot of the other martial arts, like karate, is very combative, usually. So whatever you're doing, once you decide to make that strike, you're definitely going to hurt them, right?
Right.
The philosophy behind Aikido, they do the grappling and the throws, and you can do it in a way that you kind of have the choice. Do I want to break your arm or not? So that was why it kind of appealed to me from that perspective.
Interesting. Interesting. So is it like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, where you yourself have to get on the ground and grapple with your opponent, or more like judo, where you're from a standing?
Yeah, it's more like judo, which again, this is just not to badmouth jiu-jitsu, but it's one of the things that I like about it is it's about standing. You can do things when you're kneeling, but ideally you want to be standing, because Aikido is more about engaging multiple attackers. That's one of the things our sensei would say. It's like, jiu-jitsu can be great if you grab someone to the ground and you grapple, but if there's 3 people that you're fighting, you pull one person to the ground and then their two friends are just going to start kicking.
Right,
and that's
right,
going to be
right.
it, right? So that's why like jujitsu is just not, for
Okay.
me.
I've always been more of a striker type, like kickboxing and taekwondo. But recently I've been thinking about taking either a judo or jiu-jitsu class in order to add variety to my style. So now I'll definitely be considering Aikido. All right. Thank you, Derek. This has been economist and candidate for Guilford County Commissioner, Derek Mobley. Thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you for having me.
I wish you the best of luck in your campaign, and just hope that some of these big ideas get more attention, because I think these ideas definitely deserve more attention. This has been a very interesting conversation. Thank you.